If you enjoy unusual stories, you've come to the right place.
This is the real story of the Smurl family. If you think you already know it from films, the true account is stranger and more complicated. Imagine a quiet Pennsylvania street in the 1970s. A family moves in, looking for a fresh start after being displaced by flooding. Within a few years, their nights are invaded by noises, smells, and a presence that will not leave. A modest duplex on Chase Street becomes a headline, then a book, then a made-for-TV movie, and decades later another Hollywood retelling. At the center of all of this are ordinary people pushed to the edge by something they could not explain, and the choices they made while their world grew hostile. Chapter 2: Arrival and Small Things. Jack and Janet Smurl moved into the house in West Pittston with their children and Jack's elderly parents. They intended to repair the place and rebuild their lives. At first, the oddities were the sort you might dismiss in any old house. Tools went missing. A rotten odor would appear and then vanish. Paint bled through in places where it couldn't have. Those small frays of discomfort were easy to ignore at first. But they did not stay small. The minor disturbances congealed into a pattern. Doors moved on their own. Shadows threaded the living rooms at night. Voices sounded like an argument when the house was empty. Chapter 3: Repeated Disturbances. Small things continued to relocate themselves. A toy left in one place would be found somewhere else. A pan would show up in a corner of the kitchen where it had not been. Normal life felt interrupted. The family started to document episodes in journals. They called for help. Neighbors whispered. Curiosity turned the home into an attraction. People came to look, full of questions and with flashes of cameras. Each new story sharpened the family's fear rather than easing it. What might have been shrugged off became evidence of something recurring and intentional. Chapter 4: Escalation. As months passed, events escalated. Mattresses shook as if gripped by hands. A kitchen fixture crashed without a clear cause. A thick, rotten smell would suffuse rooms without origin. Sleep became rare and broken. Daylight hours carried the residue of what had happened after sunset. The family's normal rhythms were eroded by repeated, unexplained events. The routine of daily life began to revolve around the next disturbance. Chapter 5: Physical and Intimate Violations. The Smurls reported physical assaults. They said objects were hurled at family members. They reported an incident in which the family dog was allegedly thrown against a wall. One child reportedly fell down a staircase in circumstances the family found suspicious. More disturbing were the intimate accounts. Both Jack and Janet later recounted episodes they described as sexual assaults by a non-human presence. Those allegations shocked local readers and widened the horror surrounding the case. Once claims of direct personal harm entered the narrative, the story left the realm of nuisance and became a matter of safety and morality. Chapter 6: Public Attention and Institutions. The family's calls for help made the case public. Local reporters investigated and filed stories. Religious figures visited and offered prayer or counsel. Paranormal investigators requested access and collected what they could. Each institutional visit added another frame through which the events were interpreted. For some, the involvement of clergy and investigators validated the Smurls' claims. For others, those same interventions fed a growing spectacle. The house became not just a home, but a contested site of evidence and testimony. Chapter 7: The Warrens and National Conversation. In 1986, Ed and Lorraine Warren became involved. They were already public figures in the American paranormal scene. The Warrens recorded interviews, performed rituals, and publicly described the house as occupied by multiple spirits and at least one powerful demon. Their involvement propelled the case into national conversation. Believers found their accounts confirmatory. Skeptics found them sensational. The Warrens collected audio, photographs, and statements they argued were proof. To many observers, the Smurl affair fit a familiar script: faith confronting the unknown, with investigators, priests, journalists, and neighbors all trying to make sense of what was happening. Chapter 8: Evidence, Records, and Questions. The concrete bodily claims are what kept attention on the story. Physical assaults and intimate violations made the case difficult to dismiss as mere blemish or anecdote. At the same time, critics advanced sober explanations. Some pointed to psychological stress and family tension. Others mentioned the power of suggestion and the ways media attention can inflate minor incidents into larger narratives. Medical records and later biographies raised questions about Jack's health and possible neurological issues that could affect perception and memory. Priests who later visited reported mixed experiences. Some claimed nothing unusual occurred during their time in the house. These contradictions made it difficult to settle on a single, incontrovertible account. Chapter 9: Community Impact. The effects on West Pittston were plainly visible. Neighbors who once watched out for one another grew wary. Teenagers dared one another to approach the house. Strangers came with flashbulbs and questions. Local clergy were divided between pastoral care for a family in obvious distress and a reluctance to endorse dramatic actions without evidence. That mixture of compassion and skepticism shaped how the Smurls were treated. They were neither uniformly believed nor universally dismissed. They were met with a patchwork of support, doubt, and institutional caution. Chapter 10: The Smurls' Responses. The family tried many approaches. They documented events in diaries. They welcomed investigators, journalists, priests, and television crews. They co-authored a book with journalists and with the Warrens, a move that nationalized their experience and fixed details in print. For the Smurls, proving the reality of what they had endured carried the promise of relief and of restoring their reputation, which had suffered under accusations of fabrication or attention-seeking. At the same time, turning private terror into public narrative had consequences. The family became characters in a larger drama, and public interest sometimes felt like exploitation rather than assistance. Chapter 11: Departure and Aftermath. By the late 1980s, the Smurls left the Chase Street house. Their departure did not end debate. Some later occupants reported nothing unusual, a fact skeptics used to argue against a housebound phenomenon. Believers countered that the malevolent presence followed the family, or that moving changed the circumstances that allowed manifestations to occur. The Smurls continued to carry the scars of their ordeal: persistent fear, strained relationships, and the difficulty of rebuilding a sense of safety after years of being terrorized. Leaving the house offered physical distance, but did not erase damage done over the previous years. Chapter 12: Media Memory and Retellings. The Smurl case entered the catalog of American supernatural folklore. It inspired a television movie in 1991 and has been revisited in magazines, documentaries, and popular retellings over the decades. Each retelling emphasized different elements: the devout investigators, the skeptical doctors, the testimony of the family, or the raw spectacle of the public response. The Warrens' files, tapes, notes, photographs have been re-examined repeatedly, producing fresh debates rather than final answers. Over time, the story became both a literal case study and a cultural symbol. It could be read as confirmation of spiritual warfare or as an example of collective suggestion and the media's role in myth-making. Chapter 13: The Human Cost. Arguments over authenticity often obscure a basic fact: people were hurt. Imagine living daily under suspicion, with neighbors whispering and reporters on your porch. Imagine telling your children the noises are real and then watching them sleep with one eye open for years. Whether or not one accepts supernatural explanations, the Smurls endured legitimate trauma. Their lives were parsed in interviews, condensed into books and films, and often treated as entertainment rather than as the private suffering of a family. That process of turning pain into spectacle compounds the original harm. Chapter 14: Institutions and Tension. The case tested protocols and beliefs. Some clergy demanded medical and psychological evaluation before endorsing spiritual explanations. Others performed blessings and rites in earnest, convinced something malevolent was present. Paranormal investigators gathered recordings and encouraged meticulous logs. Psychologists and doctors urged clinical study and caution. The interplay between spiritual practice and empirical inquiry proved messy. No single authority provided a definitive resolution, and the collision of faith, medicine, and journalism created more questions than answers. Chapter 15: Context and Symbolism. In 1980s America, anxieties about unseen threats were widespread. The Smurl haunting tapped into cultural fears about hidden dangers, moral decline, and the fragility of domestic safety. Ghost stories often tell us more about the living than the dead. They process communal guilt, uncertainty, and change. The Smurl case fit this pattern, and its retellings reflected contemporary anxieties as much as, if not more than, the original episodes in a West Pittston duplex. Over time, the narrative hardened into archetypes: the innocent family, the determined investigators, the skeptical professional, and the ambiguous evidence. Chapter 16: What Remains Clear. Strip away rhetoric and sensationalism, and certain human facts remain. The Smurls experienced fear, loss of sleep, and social fracture. They asked for help and spoke their truth. We need not accept every claim without scrutiny, but we can acknowledge the pain they described. The case reminds us that memory and trauma shape how stories are told, and that institutions respond imperfectly when faced with the anomalous. Chapter 17: Voices and Unresolved Questions. If you listen closely to the Smurl story, you hear many voices: the frightened family, the helpful priest, the skeptical psychologist, the determined investigator, the neighbor with a sour memory, and the journalist trying to fit a complex ordeal into a headline. Those voices do not agree, they interrupt and contradict one another. Yet together they form a fuller picture than any single perspective could provide. The Smurl case endures not because it offers a neat answer, but because it poses enduring questions about belief, evidence, and the costs of being seen. Chapter 18: Closing Reflection. The Smurl haunting resists tidy resolution. Photographs and books remain. Interviews circulate. Debates continue. Whether the cause was a haunting, a neurological condition, a social contagion, or a combination of factors, the family felt terror and asked for help. That human plea is the clearest, most urgent truth. Behind every legend stand real people with real wounds. How we treat their stories, whether with compassion, skepticism, or a mix of both, says as much about us as the events themselves.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories.